All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today we're going to be looking at my top 55 players in college football from the 2021 season. Of course, we got a handful of bowl games left, including the college football playoff and the national championship, but this list is pretty much set in stone. This list was not easy to make whatsoever. There's an honorable mentions list right here on the screen while we kind of discuss the rules here. I avoided crowding quarterbacks. I only put a handful of them on here, the obvious ones, of course, because that's, again, obvious that quarterbacks will be on the list. There was a lot of great ones. That's the most important position on every single football team. So I refrained from putting a lot of quarterbacks. Wanted to dish out the respect to multiple different players and conferences from, Power 5 to Group of 5. Wanted to make sure there's plenty of diversity. Again, it wasn't easy to make, so you're probably going to see players on here that should be. Go ahead and leave it in the comments. It's not easy whatsoever. Just a few honorable mentions, though. Matt Arazia, nation's top punter. This guy was insane. He averaged 51 punt yards per attempt. He had 79 attempts. That was 20 more attempts than the guy that was number 2 in average. So he was great all season long. Receiver like A.T. Perry and quarterback Caleb Williams for Oklahoma. Williams was great at times. He really showcased his talent, but they still lost to Oklahoma State late in the year. Their passing attack outside of a handful of games wasn't great with him under center. Obviously, next year he'll be a top 10 player for sure, but he didn't get the start until about halfway through the season. So Caleb Williams, he's going to be an honorable mention for now. So jumping right into things, at number 55, linebacker from Wyoming, Chad Muma, 142 tackles. That's the nation's lead. He only missed one tackle on the year. That, leading the nation in tackles with only one missed attempt is pretty insane. 8 tackles for loss. He also had 3 picks. He should have been Mountain West Defensive Player of the Year, in my opinion. The guy that won it over him, we'll get to him in a minute. But the Pro Football Focus, they gave it to Chad. Wyoming, they didn't really have a great run defense, but he was phenomenal for them. They would have been a lot worse. I think they were 100th nationally against the run. Without him, that would have been probably a lot worse. He was an enforcer for them, though. I really like how he played throughout the year. So 55, to kick things off, Chad Muma. 54, Treylon Burks, Arkansas receiver, 1,100 yard season, 600-plus yard receiving games. He showcased his athleticism and hands tremendously throughout the season. Against Ole Miss, I really like what he did. He really bailed them out a lot in that game. 179 yards, 2 scores against Alabama. Josh Jobe could not hold him in that game whatsoever. Burks was terrific all year long. And KG Jefferson, he kind of had his struggles at times, but Burks, he's probably going to be a first or second round receiver. He had a phenomenal season. You could probably argue he was higher, but I like 54 for Burks. He's the first receiver on the list. 53, Jaquan McMillian, one of the nation's top corners, 56 tackles, 15 pass breakups. He had 5 picks. Elite level of play for the sophomore. His speed, athleticism. He could run with anybody in the country. I wouldn't be shocked in a couple years if he potentially transfers to a higher up Power 5 school. McMillan's a stud. I really like what he did this year for ECU. Unfortunately, their bowl game was canceled. The Military Bowl against Boston College. I'm not sure if ECU will be able to reschedule with another opponent. I'm pretty sure BCU is the one that pulled out. But ECU, Jaquan McMillian makes the list. Kaython Thibodeaux, this one's probably going to shock some people. I put him at 52. He was a first-team All-American due to the impact he had all around. But outside of the UCLA game, where he had almost 5 tackles for loss, he also had 2 sacks. They could not contain him in that game. UCLA, doesn't matter who blocked him. He closed out in that game. He made play after play after play. Nobody could block him. They could have triple-teamed him. It wouldn't have worked. He was great in that game. But outside of that, it was kind of quiet overall for the year. He had 12 tackles for loss. Over the final 6 games, only had 3 sacks. Against Utah, he was going to be relied on to be the tone setter, and he just wasn't against Utah there late in the year. Kayvon, obviously he's probably going to go first or second in the draft. But overall, this wasn't the year I really expected from Kayvon. Of course, he was unhealthy to start the year. And then down the stretch, I just wasn't really impressed with how he played. Of course, he draws a lot of double teams, a lot of attention. So, obviously it's not going to show up on the stat sheet. But still, he's got to find a way to be the tone setter, and he wasn't late in the year. 51, Sam Williams. The Ole Miss defense took big strides this year. He's 4th nationally in sacks with 12.5. He also had 4 forced fumbles. Him and Chance Campbell were huge in that turnaround for the Rebel defense. I really like how Williams played this season. I thought he was a consistent performer for Ole Miss. 50, Andrew Vastardis and the whole Michigan offensive line. Obviously, they could be top 10, but this is individual, and this group altogether were great as a whole. So that's why they're going to come in at 50 here. 223 yards per game, 5.3 yards per carry. They're also first by far in fewest tackles for loss allowed, only 27. The next closest was like Air Force at 41. They're also second in sacks allowed. The only teams that did better were Air Force and Army in terms of sacks allowed. And those guys, they never dropped back. So Michigan, they pretty much dominated in both categories. The offensive line was phenomenal all season long. And of course, they could be higher, but again, this is individual, and as a group, they were collectively elite. So that's why they come in at number 50. Bijan Robinson at 49. He only played in 10 games. Had 1,100-plus yard season, though, 11 touchdowns. He's as shifty and as elusive as they come. He can fit through any hole. He had 200-plus against TCU. I loved watching him in that game. All games, really. He did so many good things against Oklahoma. He had a dynamic run that, at the time, seemed to put him at the forefront for the Heisman. He failed the top 100-plus yards, that is, over those final 3 contests, and he missed the last 2 with injury. So it was a quiet second half for Robinson. Texas, they started losing a lot of games. They lose 4 or 5 in a row at one point, so he obviously didn't get as much recognition. And he could have ended up higher on this list, but he kind of slowed down towards the end of the year. Next year, though, I can't wait to watch him play. He's one of my favorite players in the country. Bijan is a stud, so obviously coming into next year, he'll be a top 10 player. 48, Lou Nichols, the freshman running back for Central Michigan, leads the nation in yards and carries. He averages well over 5.5 yards per carry, I'm pretty sure, and to do that on 311 carries, that's pretty impressive. He was just a workhorse, dynamic runner, a bigger guy for Central Michigan all year long. Of course, he still has the Barstool Sports Bowl, so maybe if he could somehow string together 290 yards, which I don't think he will, he could have a 2,000-yard season. But he does lead the nation in yards per game, 142.5. He will likely end the year first in multiple categories, the yards per game, the total yards, and the carries. 15 touchdowns. It's middle of the pack in terms of running backs. The nation's leader is like 23, but Nichols, phenomenal season for him. Looking at number 47, Cameron Thomas. He ended up being the Mountain West Player of the Year for one of the nation's top defenses. The Aztecs were great all year long. They had some missteps against Utah State, Fresno State. Collectively, though, for the most part, they were pretty good. Their offense didn't do a lot of favors for them, so they were on the field a lot in some of those games. But 71 tackles, along with 20.5 tackles for loss for your defensive ends, just insane production. Another 17 QB hurries to go along with 11.5 sacks. Cameron Thomas was phenomenal for San Diego State. Tyler Algier, speaking of the nation's leader in rushing touchdowns, that's him. 23, 1,600-plus yards, averaged 5.8 yards per carry, 276 carries. He was a workhorse for him. He had a handful of 200 yards games. What he did in the bowl game where he straight up carried them. He had 192, 3 scores. He could probably – there's only about 3 or 4 guys that can probably catch him. He's 3 touchdowns more than, the next highest. I think Hassan Haskins is at 20. He might have 2 games left, so he might get caught, but more than likely Algier is going to end the year as the leading touchdown rusher. Their schedule ended up not being incredibly tough, so that's why I got him down here at 46, but he was phenomenal for the Cougars all year long. I'm pretty sure he's headed to the NFL, though. Kenyon Green at 45, versatile lineman for Texas A&M. Spent most of the year at tackle, but of course he can play center, guard, whatever you ask of him. Only 20 pressures allowed over the past 2 seasons. And he was a big reason why A&M, 5.2 yards per carry. They had to replace a lot of starters. He was the only returning one, I believe. And he was just so big for them and making sure there was no fall off. He was one of the nation's top linemen. As was Osiris Torrance, first team All-Sun Belt, 194 rushing yards per game for UL. They also had 34 rushing touchdowns. He's going to be probably a top 150 pick, 120 in the next upcoming draft. Him and Max Mitchell, they were phenomenal this year. Torrance, though, he's probably the nation's top interior lineman in terms of pass blocking. Really like what he brings to the table. This offensive line as a whole, they weren't as great as I expected coming into the year, but altogether it's still a great unit. Again, they're a little soft compared to what I thought they were going to be, but still had 2 all-conference performers. Number 43, Jerreth Sterns. You probably could put him even higher. The receiver from Western Kentucky followed Zach Kitley and Bailey Zappi over from Houston Baptist, and he ended with insane production, 150 receptions, 1,900 yards. Those are both by far the nation's leader, and he's also tied with Jordan Addison for touchdowns. So you might not end the year as the leader in touchdowns, but those 2 marks were top 5 in FBS history, a season to remember for him and WKU's offense. I have him coming in at 43. You'll see me do this about 2 or 3 more times where 2 players share a number slot right here at 42, Verone McKinley and Jaquan Brisker, both safeties. It was too hard to not give the nod to one or the other. They were both phenomenal. McKinley, 71 tackles, six picks, which was the nation's high. He's a great box safety, can do things in the back end as well. Jaquan Brisker, he was also an all-around performer. He's great in coverage, a high AQ player, 64 tackles on a great defense in Penn State. I gave them both the 42nd ranking on this list. Two terrific safeties in McKinley and Brisker. Number 41, Devontae Wyatt from Georgia. Georgia linemen, obviously, they're not going to put up great stats. They're just that good of a collective unit. Unimpressive numbers. Jordan Davis's are even shallower, but who cares? They're just on the screen, only 7 tackles for loss. But his size, 6'3", 315, evident on every single play. Incredible penetrator. They all made each other better pretty much. Carter, Davis, all of them. Devontae Wyatt, he was a phenomenal player for Georgia, and he's going to look to wreak havoc in the national semifinal against Michigan. Number 40, Darian Kennard. The Wildcats' offensive line was one of the nation's best. 19th in sacks allowed. They also ran for 5.5 yards per carry, 206 yards per game. He was a first-team All-American. I'm pretty sure, if not, he was a first-team SEC. Most definitely Darian Kennard. He's a big-bodied guy as well. He's going to do big things in the NFL. Looking at number 39, again, I did it here, where 2 guys shared a spot. Kyle Hamilton and Jalen Foster, safeties from Notre Dame and South Carolina, respectively. Kyle Hamilton only played in 7 games, unfortunately. 3 picks. 2 of them came in the season opener against Florida State, where they were both highly impressive. He showcased why he's a top 5 pick, though. The IQ, the elusive, the athletic ability. He showed it against FSU on one of those picks where he wasn't even camera frame, came all the way over from the middle of the field to the sideline to make a pick. That highlight is going to obviously be replayed a lot. His draft season heats up. Jalen Foster, though, he had 5 picks, one of the nation's leaders in that category, along with 91 tackles. He was just a premier playmaker all season long for the Gamecocks. Deuce Vaughn, over 79 yards of offense for him, 1,200 plus on the ground. He's one of the smallest players in college football, but he uses all of the athleticism he has, all the speed he has to perfection. They get him involved in multiple different facets of the game as a runner, a pass catcher. He's just highly impressive. End of the year with 5+ 100-yard rushing games in a row. He had a total of 8. Obviously, he's not going to be a workhorse, as the size is a big concern, but he makes the most out of the touches he gets. He averages a big yards per carry mark. I love what Deuce Vaughn does. I don't know if next year will be his final year. I don't know if he'll go to the NFL or not. I love watching him play. I hope he sticks around for as long as he can. He comes in at 38 on this list. 37, John Mackey Award winner and tight end Trey McBride. 90 receptions on the year, 1,100 plus yards. Only 1 touchdown that came against Vanderbilt in week 2, but he averaged 7.5 catches per game, 93 yards per game on an offense that scored less than 24 points per game. Offense all around was not very good, but this is one of the lone bright spots. McBride was a perennial tight end coming into the season too, and he put together a John Mackey Award receipt. So phenomenal season from him, the lone bright spot for Colorado State, who even fired Steve Adazio at the end of the season. 36, Drake London. He would have been higher. He only played in 8 games, though. He unfortunately got hurt scoring a touchdown against Arizona. He was on pace for another big game that day. He ends the year with 88 receptions, a little over 1,000 yards, 7 scores, 600-plus receiving games. He had double-figure receptions and I think 2 or 3 straight leading up to the Arizona game. He had 8 in that first half. He's just phenomenal. He's got great size. He uses all of it, too. He's got great athletic ability. He played basketball, and you can see that he knows how to rebound when he goes up and uses his hands to come down with any ball. Incredibly physical as well, 135 yards per game. He was one of the nation's top pass catchers. He should be very good at the next level as well. Breece Hall from Iowa State. 2nd straight Big 12 Offensive Player of the Year award for him. 1,400 yards rushing, 20 touchdowns. He will not be playing in the bowl game, but 1,800 total yards, 23 total scores for him. He was just a phenomenal player for Iowa State all year long. Cyclones had a bit of a disappointing season, but he was, again, a terrific bright spot for them, winning back-to-back awards in the Big 12. Breece Hall, he should have a phenomenal career at the pros. Brock Bowers, this guy was shining all season long. A guy that's this big should not be able to move the way he does or catch the ball the way he does. Brock Bowers is going to be a great NFL player one day. He's got potentially 2 games left, 47 receptions, 791 yards, 11 scores. shine in the SEC title game, career highs in receptions and yards. I think Brock Bowers is a phenomenal player. Can't wait to watch him play in the playoffs. This is a good player. He's going to come in at 34 here. Number 33, Charles Cross. He'd probably make the argument he should be higher in this. For Mississippi State, they have 652 pass attempts, and for him, they allow only 16 pressures, 0 sacks, I'm pretty sure. That's pretty ridiculous. 700-plus dropbacks because, Mississippi State, the air raid offense, they're dropping back a ton. They do it pretty much every single play. For him to put up that kind of production, it's pretty insane. Obviously, Mississippi State, they get the ball out in a hurry. But still, that's an absurd amount of dropbacks. Got to be very conditioned, very pristine. Charles Cross did that. First team All-SEC. He's going to be a first-round pick in April's draft. Again, here we gave two guys the nod on one spot. 32nd is DeMarvin Leal, Isaiah Foskey, both coming off the defensive line for Texas A&M and Notre Dame, respectively. DeMarvin Leal, he didn't really have the big-time season I was expecting. He didn't show up on the stat sheet versus Bama, Arkansas, or Auburn. So consistency was kind of tough. But they have a lot of depth, a lot of different players that got involved that kind of overshadowed with production. He still led the team, though, with 12.5 tackles for loss, 8.5 sacks. Thought he'd be more dominant on the stat sheet, but overall draws a lot of double teams, incredibly physical. DeMarvin Leal, first-team All-American, as expected to be. And Isaiah Foskey, 47 tackles, 11.5 behind the line of scrimmage, 10 sacks. He also had 5 forced fumbles. I'm pretty sure that lead the country coming off the edge for Notre Dame. He was a star. Him and Hamilton and all those guys. JT Bertrand, another one. The defense was really good. They got better as the season went on. I don't think he's opted out of the bowl game. I'm pretty sure he'll play here on New Year's Day. Number 31, Riley Moss. 5 pass breakups, 4 picks. He had 2 of them in week 1 against Indiana. Both were pick sixes, too. I thought he was one of the nation's top lockdown corners. They really missed him, though. Once he went down with a knee injury, they went 1-2 in his absence. They got torched against Purdue, but Matt Hankins wasn't good in that game anyways. So, Iowa, they did everything they could on defense. They had 2 great corners. Moss, he luckily avoided a bad injury early in the middle of the season when he went down. He did miss a couple games, came back, and I thought he was still a pretty solid player. Had a handful of pass breakups in the games following. But Iowa, they could have had a much better season, and Moss would have been a big part of it. Number 30, Zion Johnson, a versatile guy, played a lot at tackle this year. Guard, he's capable of playing there too. He's a great run and pass blocker. Showcased that in 2021. Boston College, of course, they didn't have the season we expected to have. Phil Jerkovich went down early in the season of an injury, and after that it was just kind of shaky on offense. But Johnson certainly stood out. He's probably going to be the top interior lineman in the draft taken. 29, David Bell. This guy's phenomenal. It's crazy to think him and Rondale Moore were both on the same roster as when Bell was a freshman. 93 grabs this past season, 1,200-plus yards. It's crazy. The best opponents he played, he shredded them. That top-ranked Iowa secondary, 240 yards. I just noticed Moss was out, but Matt Hankins got absolutely shredded by David Bell. He could not contain him whatsoever. 1 TD in that game. Also had 200-plus in a win over Michigan State. Caught a lot of balls. He's a possession pass catcher, so less than 14 yards per catch, but he's nasty in the open field as well. He can be a great vertical threat. They just got it to him as much as they could because they know how talented he is. He has declared for the draft. I don't think he's going to be playing in the bowl game. Bell, this is going to be a very good ball player. First quarterback here, 28, Brennan Armstrong. I figured that he was going to be one of the lone bright spots for Virginia. I expected a big breakout year for him, but not this big. 404 yards per game is absurd. He was more of a dual-threat guy. This year, he decided to just stick in the pocket and sling it around. His arm talent was pretty ridiculous. I was impressed by his speed last year as a runner, and for him to have this year through the air. This guy's going to be a great player next season. Some of his weapons are probably going to leave, though, but he's ridiculous. 4,400 yards. Virginia's bowl game got canceled with the Fenway Bowl, so this is going to be his final numbers here. 31 touchdowns for the year, 9 on the ground. Brian Armstrong, though, expected a good year from him, but this was pretty insane what he was able to do. He's probably going to be the best dual-threat quarterback in the nation next year. 27, Ikem Ekwonu. He's an elite run blocker. He built his draft stock up tremendously this season, likely climbed in the top 5. A lot of people like what he can do. Plays for a very good NC State football team. All around a very talented bunch. And Ikem Ekwonu, he comes in at 27 as a first-team All-American. 26, Tyler Beatty, the running back from Missouri, the leading rusher in the SEC. 1,600-plus yards on the ground. He had 5 200-plus yard rushing games. 14 scores for the year. He did a lot as a pass catcher as well, kept catching 50-plus passes. Beatty was a stud. Of course, some of his games of 200-plus yards came against North Texas, Vanderbilt, South Carolina. But again, Missouri themselves, they were not really great this year. So they needed those games. Those were close games for the most part, and he did everything they could for this offense. Almost 2,000 yards on the season. 1,934 yards total for Beatty on the season in the SEC. It's a pretty impressive mark. Sean Tucker, though, at 25, he was impressive as a freshman last year, but I thought he was elite this season. Last game of the year, Pitt held him to 29 yards, but he had 150-plus on some stiff competition, Clemson, Wake Forest. Not a great run defense, but still, for Wake Forest, to come in there and be able to bully him up on the ground is impressive. 200-plus on the ground against Boston College. He was the focal point of a very one-dimensional offense. It's another reason why it's impressive, even against an opponent like Wake, as they're incredibly one-dimensional, especially after Tosh Harris left. This passing game was non-existent. 9 100-plus yard games. He's going to end just south of 1,500 yards, 12 scores on the year. Sean Tucker, I think he's a very good ball player. Here at 24, Hassan Haskins and Blake Corum. Again, you could probably put these guys higher along with the Michigan offensive line. 2,200-plus yards as a duo, 31 total touchdowns, and they potentially have 2 more games left. So these guys are to keep running it up on the numbers. Haskins, 160-plus yards, 5 touchdowns against Ohio State. Corum was a little banged up there late in the year, and he still ended up with pretty good production himself. But Haskins got a big workload against Ohio State. He had 6 yards per carry in 2 games against FBS opponents this season. One of them was Ohio State. So talking about showing up in the biggest games possible, this running back duo is terrific. Can't wait to see what they do here in a couple of days. Jalen Pitre from Baylor. I was very interested to see how him and Terrell Bernard played this year. I made a bold prediction that Baylor would have the top defense in the Big 12, and obviously they didn't have the best, even though they played very well. Picked off Spencer Sanders 4 times in the Big 12 title game. Oklahoma State's defense, I'd give them the nod as the best in the conference, but Pitre was the best player on the defensive side of the ball. 70 tackles, 17.5 tackles for loss, 3 forced fumbles. He's a box safety, so of course he's going to get a lot more production being down in the box. He can make plays in the back end as well. Pitre, he's an all-around terrific ball player. Can't wait to see what he does in the Sugar Bowl. 22, Roger McCreary, probably the top lockdown corner in the SEC. As a senior, he was another one of those guys you knew he was going to be good, but he got much better this season. 14 pass breakups, 2 picks. He was terrific as a lockdown guy for the Tigers. Evan Neal, arguably the nation's top offensive lineman, first-team All-American. He did a lot for them. They struggled early in the year, even late in the year against Auburn. They were not very good, but he was right there as that veteran to pull these guys along. He was the anchor for the Crimson Tide, and he's going to be big as they gear up to make this national title run here. He comes in at 21. Number 20, the Hornick Award winner, and Marcus Jones, for the nation's most versatile player. 4 kickoff return TDs. That includes punt and kickoff, that is. One came with 17 seconds to go versus SMU that were tied. He got the return right after an SMU touchdown. He went 100 yards. That's when the game was tied with 17 seconds to go. One of the best plays on the year. Great corner, though. He had 5 picks, 13 pass breakups. He's also a very good tackler. He had a receiving touchdown as well. This guy's all around just a terrific ball player. He's not going to be playing the bowl game, I don't believe. Regardless, he's going to be a good player at the pros. This is a terrific player. His production is pretty insane for everything he does. They could have gotten him involved even more on offense, but it's kind of like a Dory Jackson from a couple years ago from USC. He'd make an impact on offense, but they wanted to keep him healthy as possible, so he would get less and less touches, and this was an example of that. Number 19, he was my Heisman pick, C.J. Stroud from Ohio State. He was even the favorite at one point for the award after the Michigan State game. 400-plus yards, 6 touchdowns, and just 1 half a ball. He had 3,800 yards this season. Only needs about 140 against Utah in the Rose Bowl to eclipse 4,000, so he should get that done. 38 touchdowns with 5 picks. But he tremendously improved over the course of the year. Early in the season, he kind of struggled. Chemistry wasn't there. Timing was off. Eventually it got there. And he was probably the nation's top deep ball thrower. I think Pro Football Focus actually gave him the nod there for that. He was a terrific downfield thrower. Of course, he had this great group of receivers. These guys come in at number 18, all 3 of them. It would have just been a waste of time to try and dish out 3 separate spots for these guys. They were all tremendous. I thought this was the greatest receiving trio in college football history, truly, in terms of talent. These guys were so fun to watch. It's unfortunate we're not going to be able to see them play together after the Rose Bowl. I don't expect any opt-outs. Wilson and Olave, though, they'll be headed to the NFL. The numbers are on the screen. Olave, he'll likely be the third 1,000-yard receiver the Buckeyes have this season. He's just a handful of receptions to get there. These guys, though, were phenomenal. Obviously, anybody could have thrived in C.J. Stroud's role at quarterback, but it certainly takes a special player, though, to be able to get these type of numbers from his receivers. Altogether, this passing offense was terrific to watch all season long. And the coming out party will be against Utah in the Rose Bowl. Number 17, Malcolm Rodriguez from Oklahoma State, 120 tackles, 15 tackles for loss. For the fourth year in a row, he was top 2 in tackles for the Cowboys. This will be his final game. 4 forced fumbles. Final game against Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl, that is. I thought he was a terrific enforcer. He was the tone setter for them on defense. Made such a big impact for them. This is all around a really good unit, but without him, you got to have good linebackers that execute the 4-2-5, and that's exactly what Rodriguez did to a T. At number 16, Matt Corral, 3,300 yards. And we had 20 touchdowns. He didn't have more than 2 passing touchdowns versus any Power 5 opponent, but he made up for that with his legs. It was just annoying for defenses with his legs. This guy, 3rd and 15, it doesn't matter. He'll run. He runs off aggressiveness. He's got pretty respectable speed. He almost had 600 yards, along with 11 touchdowns. He has one more game against Baylor in the Sugar Bowl. Pretty good career. He improved tremendously this year. He had 2 games last year when he had, 5+ picks? Yeah, he had 11 picks in 2 games. Last year he only had 4 total this year. 1 game left, but regardless, he improved tremendously at being able to read defenses, make better decisions. Corral climbed the draft boards immensely. He comes in at number 16. Number 15, Ahmad Gardner. He hasn't allowed a touchdown in 2 seasons for Cincy. 3 picks this year. They don't really throw to his side of the field much. He's very physical. As a press man corner, he can run stride for stride downfield if anybody too. We'll see how he does against Jamison Williams here. Him and then his teammate Kobe Bryant on here a little later. Great receiver, great corner for Cincinnati. He's probably going to go first round as well. Jordan Addison. I was a big fan of this guy last year, but this year he took that next level, as did his quarterback Kenny Pickett. Blitnikoff Award winner, 90+ receptions, 1,500 yards once he plays the bowl game against Michigan State. He should likely eclipse that mark. 17 touchdowns, just needs 1 more to become the leader in college football. He's tied with Jerreth Sterns, as we noted earlier. He should likely eclipse that. Jordan Addison, though, a possession guy. He's also great after the catch. He even ran for a touchdown as a versatile player for them. Addison, big fan of his. As we just mentioned, Ahmad Gardner's teammate, Kobe Bryant, the Jim Thorpe Award winner, 11 pass breakups, 3 picks. He also had 3 fumbles as he's very active down in the box. This is a phenomenal corner duo the Bearcats have. And Bryant and Gardner, they played terrific all season long. They couldn't throw to the other side of the field, so they went his way, and it worked himself into a Jim Thorpe Award winner. So, obviously, opponents have had headaches with these two all year long. Jermaine Johnson, the Georgia transfer, figured he'd have a pretty good impact for Florida State, but not to this degree as of a first-team All-American. 70 tackles coming off the edge, 70.5 tackles for loss, double-figure sacks. He also had 2 fumbles. You've seen it week 1 against Notre Dame. And then throughout the remainder of the season, he was a bright spot on defense that's young. They're progressing. Johnson, the senior there for them, he was terrific. He was fun to watch all season long for the FSU Seminoles. Number 11, Bailey Zappi, just shy of the only 6,000-yard passing season in college football history. They benched him in the fourth quarter of the bowl win when they were up by like 20, 30 points on Appalachian State. It was his final game, and they decided to bench him. I don't know why. 62 touchdowns, though. 11 picks, 426 yards per game. By far, those numbers are all, what are they called? Single season records in college football history, the touchdowns and the yards. We didn't think Joe Burrow, once Joe Burrow did it, we didn't know if it'd be broken. Well, it just got broken 2 years later, so he had 4+ touchdowns in each of the final 7 games of the season. This air raid offense was ridiculous. You have to have a good player to, run it, and Zappi did it to perfection. Western Kentucky had a great season under him. Jordan Davis at number 10. Of course, a no-show on the stat sheet, as was Devontae Wyatt earlier, but he's massive, 360 pounds. Was he 6'4", 6'5"? He's massive. He's a great penetrator, a great run stopper. He's a big reason why, along with these other guys, why they're so good at stopping the run over the last 2-3 years. This front 7 for Georgia is ridiculous. Jordan Davis had a big-time season. He disappeared against Bama. They were going fast tempo. They're throwing the ball a lot. He was just non-existent in that ball game. So that's why Jamison Williams at number 9. He's got to get the edge over Davis. because, he showed up big time in the SEC championship game, first team All-SEC performer, the Ohio State transfer. His former teammates were number 18 on this list. He comes in at number 9. That's just ridiculously how stacked they were at that pass catcher position. He missed the second half of the Auburn game. Well, he should likely eclipse the 1,500-yard mark. He should end the year with 70-plus receptions. He's also got 15 scores right now. He was a Blitnikoff Award finalist. Williams, from week 1, showcased how fast he is, how good of a vertical threat he is. Jameson Williams, flawless season from him this year. Number 8, Tyler Linderbaum, the center for Iowa, Remington Award winner. He decided to come back after being a finalist for the award last year. Comes back to school, so he figured he was going to win it. I predicted him to win this award, and he did. But, how tough was that? This guy's just ridiculously good. He was the lone standout for an Iowa offensive line that all around they struggled with size. They shuffled a lot of guys. The only guy that was a mainstay was Linderbaum, and he, on film, just flashed. Phenomenal season from him. Nakobe Dean comes in at number 7, the Butkus Award winner. 61 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss. He had 5 sacks. He had a pick 6 against Florida. One of the nation's top run stoppers, a linebacker. He's backing up a big, massive defensive line. He's probably the strongest guy on his team at linebacker. Nakobe Dean's phenomenal. He's going to be a top 30 pick in the draft probably, just like a lot of these other guys from Georgia are. Dean, phenomenal all season long. But I don't think he was as good as Devin Lloyd at number 6. This guy is ridiculous. His numbers last year were insane. They were even better this year. 106 tackles, second or third. I think he's second nationally in tackles for loss with 22. Just like 8 sacks, 4 picks. A high-volume playmaker, high IQ player. He does a little bit of everything for them, as that's evident on the stat sheet. Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year for Lloyd. Utah, where would they be without him? I don't know. They're usually pretty good on defense, but this guy is elite. He's going to play one final game in the Rose Bowl, and he should be off to the NFL. Potential top 15 pick in Lloyd. This guy is terrific. Number 5, Kenny Pickett. Another one of those guys that anticipated a big season for him. This is his 5th year. He's coming back as a veteran. He's been around a while. He had a lot to work on this year to potentially build his draft stock. And he's probably going to be the first quarterback taken now. He did it phenomenally. Couldn't have been any better. 4,300 yards, 47 total touchdowns. He was a Heisman finalist. Pickett, it wasn't a one-dimensional offense for Pitt, but it was pretty darn close. It's not like they made a conservative effort to run the ball effectively. They did a lot through the year. That was evident with Pickett on the Heisman podium, Jordan Addison winning the Blitnikoff. Pickett was phenomenal all season long. I think he's going to make a great pro. We'll see what happens in the future. Kenneth Walker at number 4. This guy actually won me a couple $100 on DraftKings to start the year. 264 yards and 4 touchdowns against Northwestern to start the season. He won me some money playing fantasy, so I appreciate that. But he didn't let off after that. 1,600 total yards, 18 scores. He was great at making runs after contact. 136 yards per game. Very elusive. Just, again, fights through contact better than anybody. On his way to a Doak Walker Award winner. He had almost 200 yards, 5 touchdowns against Michigan. The Wolverines' only loss of the year. It's a pretty stiff defense, too, and he ran right through them. They couldn't even tackle him. Obviously, he didn't show up against Ohio State, but the team got beat so bad he only had like 6 or 7 carries. So he was unable to show his talents there. Number 4 and number 5 and Walker and Pickett will not play against each other in the what bowl was it? I don't know. Whatever bowl they play in the New Year's Six, they will not be playing each other. Unfortunately, they're both opting out and declaring for the draft. Number 3, the Heisman Trophy winner, Bryce Young, 4,300 yards, 43 touchdowns, only 4 picks. He was terrific all season long. He's obviously not just a freshman compared to how good he played this season. That's what it says he is, but you can clearly tell he's matured much beyond his years. He's been the heart and soul of this offense because offensive line has not been great this year. His Heisman moment probably came when they couldn't score all game long against Auburn, and he leads them 97, 98 yards to tie it up, and then they win in overtime. And then he absolutely throttled Georgia the next week, 400-plus yards in the air, on his way to winning the Heisman Trophy. Bryce Young was terrific all season long, and he's going to look to lead them to a national championship. Will Anderson at number 2. This guy is insane. 31.5 tackles for loss, en route to an SEC Defensive Player of the Year award. People say he pads his stats against lesser-known teams. That's not true whatsoever if you look at his game log. It's not on screen, but you can go take a look. That's not true. 91 tackles as well from his outside linebacker position. 15.5 sacks. Doesn't matter who he plays. He's absolutely dominated them. He didn't record any numbers against Texas A&M, but the impact was certainly felt. even with a game or two where he didn't record any numbers, though he still ended up with that many tackles for loss. He's only the second player I know of to have 30-plus in a season. I know Sammy Brown from Houston did a couple seasons ago, but that's about it. And he also potentially has 2 more games that continue to possibly hit 35. Just been an insane season, unreal. I don't know how he didn't make the Heisman podium, but he's had a terrific season. And then number 1, Aiden Hutchinson. I gave him the nod here because of how he played against Ohio State and Penn State, 3 sacks each in both of those games. Ends the year with 14 total. No, it doesn't end the year because he's got 2 games left. But 15.5 tackles for loss up until this point. 58 stops, Aiden Hutchinson. He's drove his way all the way up to the top of draft boards. He's likely going to be number 1 or 2. Him and Kayvon will duke that out this fall. But he's had an elite season. He was the Heisman runner-up. He's just been so terrific for them in their big-time games. That's why I give him the nod here. So that's going to wrap everything up, guys. Top 55 or so players in college football from 2021.